forward. I'd like to invite Dr. Susan Gregorek for the next segment on the NIH data sharing initiative that will be starting up in January. So Susan, invite you to share your slides and unmute yourself, and thanks for our previous panel.
Thank you so much, Rebecca. That was a great panel. Am I sharing my slides, or are you sharing them and I'm remotely working them? I can do either way. Just let me know.
You should.
Yeah, I believe we're sharing.
Okay.
Yeah. No, we're sharing and you can.
Okay, that sounds great.
Susan, you should now be able to see the slides and control the move forward with your presentation.
I don't see them yet, but it may be just slow. Maybe I'm supposed to click on something. No. Okay, so I see the Vivli slide still. Ah, now I see my slide. Okay. Okay, so let me see if I can get this to work. I'm Susan Gregorek, Associate Director for Data Science. It's really great to be here today. I thoroughly enjoyed the previous panel. It was an incredibly thoughtful discussion. And since I'm new to controlling the panel remotely, if there's any delay, I apologize sincerely. So we are really living in some interesting times where data sharing is a priority. It's not just a priority of NIH and our agency, but it's also a priority of the administration and of President Biden. We all recognize that scientific data serve as catalysts for every biomedical breakthrough and every new treatment reaching patients. Sharing scientific data does require us to really prospectively think about and plan for the data that will be shared at the onset of our research. And this might be for some of us a new paradigm. I'm sure that you've heard of all of the various OSTP memos, the memo from August 25th, where OSTP issued guidance on making federally funded research data, research products actually freely available without delay. This memo directs agencies to update their public access policies as soon as possible to make publications and research funded by US taxpayers publicly accessible without an embargo or without cost. And so all of the agencies are looking at ways that we can implement this policy, including ending the optional 12-month embargo that we might currently have. And we need to do so no later than December 31st of 2025. So we are actively discussing and working on our plans for complying with this policy in this memo. You may also be aware of the May 26th memo from OSTP, which issued guidance on ensuring that federally funded research data are equitably benefiting all of Americans. This guidance contains clearly definable characteristics for two classes of online data resource repositories, a general class that's appropriate for all funded repositories, including free and easy access to those repositories, and then a second, more specific class of repositories, which has very special considerations for the sharing of human data, including additional considerations for data security and privacy considerations. This is the OSTP memo for desired characteristics data repositories. I'll be mentioning this throughout my talk. It's worth looking at that. I've seen some really nice tweets recently about these characteristics for desired repositories. We are working to comply with this memo. And these memos point to trends in the administration that support equitable access of data and support the results of research publications to the scientific community in a timely fashion with unfettered access. So, sorry about that. Shoot. Hang on, let me see if I can go back. Oh no, I'm not able to go back. Okay, I will just speak. Okay, thank you. It's a little tricky to do this, I have to say. Okay, so from NIH's perspective, data sharing is important for many reasons, probably for the same reasons that you feel as well. It sparks new research collaborations. It enhances rigor and reproducibility of studies. It enables unique data combinations for further research and secondary research. It facilitates reproducibility. Maximizing our collection and fostering stewardship and advancing our enterprise are what we hope to get out of the advances that we'll be putting forward in our data management and sharing policy. Okay, so this is sort of the timeline, the long arc of starting to develop a policy internally at NIH, starting back as early as 2016, and then all the ways in which we received guidance from the community about the policy until the final effective date. And if I click here, you should see some of the ways in which we engaged the community. We did so through tribal consultations for specific considerations for sharing tribal data. We worked with our data science policy councils and our working groups. We held a number of engagement strategies and RFIs with the community. We briefed the community through the associate of the advisory council to the director. We worked with the White House Open Science Subcommittee on Open Science, and then the secretary of HHS's Advisory Committee for Human Research Protections. So I want to point, in conjunction with the policy and the development of the policy, we worked with the National Academies on a workshop for the changing the culture of data management and data sharing. I just want to highlight this. I want to tell you some of the observations and findings that the community told us through this workshop, and then some of their recommendations, because these are informing how we implement the policy. The findings from the workshop included the fact that implementing this would really require a system-wide culture change. We needed to, they told us, align incentives for resources and the community, including all of our biomedical stakeholders. That could be other funders like NSF or DOE, institutions that may in fact stand up new resources to support this policy, publishers of journals, data repositories that will hold the data, including our GENOS repositories in Vivli, and other associations. And they told us that impactful data really relies on the successful implementation. Oh, should I stop and get questions or wait to the end? Maybe wait to the end, but thanks, I note that there's a question. Okay, requires successful implementation of the policy. So data management practices do need to be mindful of secondary data users and being mindful of that at the start of the experiment when you're creating the data and the metadata. And good management practices ensures that there is the accompanying metadata that really will support secondary data reuse, and that we do need to pay attention to the research lifecycle and the data lifecycle itself. And so these are the foundations of good data sharing, as well as QA, QC, and versioning, of course. So some of the recommendations included engaging stakeholders across the research enterprise, developing metrics for the evaluation of the policy. We are actually now in the process of developing those metrics. It's going to be an iterative process. I'm sure that we'll learn a lot from our first set of metrics, and then we'll continue to iterate through the long tail of this implementation of the policy. They recommended that we incentivize adoption of persistent unique identifiers. We completely agree. You'll see some of the activities we're doing to support that. And that we promote data citation. Even though citation standards may still be evolving, that we do encourage the promotion of data citation. And of course, that sounds like a good recommendation. And that they recommended that we harmonize our data sharing expectations and promote the alignment of different data management and sharing policies, incentives, resources, and training. And so you'll see some of that as well. So this is a really impactful workshop. It's worth looking at the report if you're interested. So, I know that we all are aware that the policy will be in effect on January 25th. That's just literally 2 months away, and that researchers who are submitting applications for NIH funding will need to prospectively plan for their data sharing by submitting their plan at the time of application. And you're going to see that this is a pretty broad policy. I'm going to speak a lot about it. And most of these slides that I'll share are actually slides from the Office of Science Policy and the Office of Extramural Research. I partner with them, and you'll see some of the work we're doing to support the policy. So first, the policy expectations that data sharing should be the default and it should be maximized to the extent possible. However, we do know that not all data can or will be shared. And so when you're developing your policy, tell us about the limitations for the sharing of those data. They could be technical limitations, they could be ethical limitations, they could be legal factors. We just need to know that you outline which data will be shared and which data will not be shared and why. Consider outlining the protection of privacy for citizens, their rights and confidentiality, and of course, we'll all abide by the laws and policies. So we really want people to think about planning for data sharing throughout the research process and life cycle. So the data management sharing policy applies to all research that is generating scientific data, including research projects. Those are the R's, the P's, the U, grant mechanisms. Some scientific career development awards, the K's, for example, the SBIR, STTR with considerations, again, for data sharing and research centers. What doesn't the policy apply to? The training grants, the T's, the fellowships, the F's, construction grants, conference grants, resource grants, and any sort of research-related infrastructure program. So all the big instrument programs, for example. So it's pretty comprehensive. By the way, it applies to the OTAs, the contracts, and the intramural research that we fund as well. So it is a comprehensive policy. So some key parameters when thinking about developing your data management and sharing plan. We believe that, all data should be managed in your laboratory. That does not necessarily mean that all data needs to be shared. However, we anticipate that you will be sharing the scientific data that is of sufficient quality and validity to reproduce or replicate research findings. So what is not in that plan is your laboratory notebooks, any preliminary analysis, the case report forms, physical objects. Preliminary data is not something that you would or need to share. When should you share the data? Well, most researchers share the data at the time of publication. That makes a lot of sense. It makes the findings reproducible or at least replicatable. Or if there is not a publication for those data at the time of your award, that is the last drop dead date that you would be sharing your data. Of course, we hope that you will share your data in a timely fashion that makes sense for your research. You do want to consider how long the data should be shared and what particular policies the journals that you're publishing in may have, or the repositories themselves that you're going to be sharing your data, what policies do they have? So there are a lot of things to consider, and this is a broad-reaching policy. A lot of folks ask, and it's quite appropriate, is how is this going to be evaluated? And so the plans will be submitted with your application. You will be presenting a budget justification. You are allowed to put in costs for the data management and sharing that you'll be doing. That will be reviewed by your review committee, but it will not be scored. They may make comments, but they will not score it. NIH will assess the plans and make decisions about your data management sharing plans. They may ask you to revise your plans. They may not, but those plans will become part of your terms and conditions of your award, and they may be monitored at regular, periodic, yearly RPPR submissions for your grant mechanism. And so we will take this very seriously. We are putting in place the necessary infrastructure at NIH to support the compliance and monitoring of data management sharing plans. It's going to take a little while, but we will be doing that. So we've hosted a number of webinars and trainings, and those will continue to go forward. I'll put a slide up at the end where you will be able to see all of the information on how you can get access to it, just to let you know that we have on a regular basis been working with the community on the data management sharing plans, and we've had a number of really great webinars, and these are all recorded and on the website that I'll show you. So I want to point out some recently issued guidance and instructions or resources. If you have the ability to have my slides, these are hyperlinks. Two important new things that just recently came out is the responsible management of sharing American Indian and Alaska Native participant data. I hope that you will look at that when you're developing your data management sharing plans. It's a really important notice, as well as the supplemental information for protecting privacy when sharing human research participant data. We get a lot of questions on this, and so I hope that you will also look at those two new notices that just recently came out. So there is quite, oh, thank you for putting that in the link. Really appreciate that. There is quite a lot to consider when developing a data management sharing plan through the sort of data flow all the way from collection, annotation and curation, the sharing of the data, the storage of the data, and then, you know, the long tail of archiving and accession. So what needs to go in your plan? When you're thinking about developing your plan, these are our recommended elements. Your IC that you're getting funding from may have additional recommendations. They may have a template that you're supposed to use. ICs will be implementing this policy according to their missions and their needs. However, we all agree that we do want to know the data types that you do intend to preserve and share, any related tools or software or code that are necessary to manipulate the data in a replicable way. Importantly, the standards, the metadata, the common data elements, the common data models that you're going to be using. We strongly encourage you to use community standards, and particularly attaching your metadata with your data when you do share it. We want you to think about the access and timeline of data preservation. Which repository do you tend to use? We encourage you to use persistent unique identifiers. We hope that you will consider doing so. And then, of course, other factors for data access, such as controlled access data, distribution or reuse of that data, and then your overall data management inside your laboratory. So we do encourage you to look at established repositories. I'll have some more to say about all of the different ways in which you can share data. I do want to make a note that ICs may have very specific data repositories which they want you to share your data in. I'll give you an example. Researchers who are working in the cranial, facial, and dental research field may be asked to share their data in FaceSpace. That's the IC is supporting FaceSpace for their researchers. It is a designated repository for their researchers. And so you may be told where to share your data, but that may be a very specific program or IC related decision. In general, we recognize that there is not going to be a one-size-all-fits solution to data management and data sharing. Research across the biomedical enterprise has really very different expectations and experiences and needs for data sharing. What a synthetic organic chemist would do and share is going to be vastly different from what a clinician or a clinical informaticist would be thinking about in data sharing. Researchers have many options, so let's just talk briefly about some of these, and then I'll do a deep dive into a few. For example, researchers can choose to share their data as part of their supplemental materials that are associated with their publications, and they can do this via PubMed Central. It's attached to the publication as a supplement. Through our partnership with AWS, Google and Microsoft Azure, but in particular AWS and the STRIDES program, we are sharing all of that data in PubMed Central through the Open Data Sponsorship Program, the ODP. This data can be found. It's not a deep search, I have to say. It's a pretty lightweight search, but you can find it, you can cite it, and you can use it in your research. Investigators may choose to share data and other digital materials from their research efforts in a number of generalist repositories like Vivli, and we'll talk about this in a minute. NIH also supports the sharing of data in our cloud service providers through Strides with either AWS, Google, or Microsoft Azure. Data can be stored there and made accessible. Currently, we store and share over 200 petabytes of biomedical data in the cloud. That there are some caveats. There is no overreaching search across the cloud for data. You really have to know which program and how it's going to be shared, and there's a bit of a heavy lift there. So it is possible, but it is not always completely straightforward. So we recognize that databases, data repositories come in various sizes, complexities, and levels of maturity. Each has a potential to bring value to a research community, but at the very different stages, from really early onset to extreme maturity, they have developed appropriate practices in ways in which they can manage and make their data ingested and available. So we want to make sure that we support repositories to align to the OSTP desired characteristics of a data repository, that they do support fair data, and that they support the trust principles. And just very briefly, you can see them outlined here, but trust is transparency of function, responsibility for data stewardship, user-focused and community-driven capabilities, sustainability to ensure that the data is uninterrupted access for researchers, that there is an attention to technologies. Those are the trust principles. So in the last 2 years, NIH has been preparing our already funded repositories to align to those characteristics, to adopt trust principles, to adopt fair principles in ways that make sense for them. So you can see the number of awards that we've made, 21 so far in the focal areas. What are researchers doing to support the sharing of data? They're supporting ways in which they can create stronger automated annotation for metadata. They're looking at impugning missing metadata and data. They're looking at porting and moving databases and resources to the cloud, and enhancing rigor and reproducibility. NIH also supports programs for funding new and existing data repositories and knowledge bases as biomedical data resources. So not as part of an R01 mechanism, but as part of an R and a U mechanism. These are supported by particular funding announcements. They're linked there at the bottom of the page. And there's a special emphasis panel overseen by the Center for Scientific Review. So the program requires that data repositories and knowledge base applicants would support an NIH institute or a series of institutes' missions and goals, and that these repositories demonstrate scientific impact in those communities. We hope that applicants will address the quality of data services and address methods that do increase efficiency of operation. That could be automating curation, curation that has automation for QA/QC, or leveraging new technologies and capabilities. We also hope that applicants will articulate strategies to engage with their targeted scientific communities with training and outreach, and with the scientific journals that align with those focal areas, and that applicants will support and establish transparent governance with scientific advisory boards, for example, and that they will support good data and management practices and data lifecycle practices, and in the development of metrics for use and usability. You can see on the side there a number of the repositories that we have been awarded through this program. Many of these are probably well known to you. A few of them are funded across NIH. They're sort of like core biomedical resources. There's also some really great opportunities to work with generalist repositories, which offer additional capabilities to share data and scientific digital projects that are a result of our research. So early this year, NIH launched a new program. It's the Generalist Repositories Ecosystem Initiative, and it supports a collaboration between the 7 generalist repositories, including Vivli, which we're so happy to work with, seen here at the bottom. What do we hope to get out of this initiative? We hope to make it just easier for researchers to find and share data. We want to improve the discoverability of the NIH-supported data that we have funded across these repositories. So these repositories are blazing trail for us. Of course, we want to enhance the rigor and reproducibility of scientific initiatives. and develop some core and shareable metrics that across these repositories. And we want to encourage the reuse of data that are stored in these repositories. This could include training and engagement with the research community. The research community does need to understand more about the importance and practices of data sharing. So these are just some, in a really nice graphical way of thinking about some of the key activities that are happening within this initiative. Developing consistent metadata models when possible across these repositories. Supporting data discovery is an important part of this initiative, and it's going to be trailblazing for what we might do in the future at a larger scale. Same with developing open and shareable metrics. And supporting use cases and educational material. Again, research community needs to know and understand how to make data fair and shareable, and then how to reuse it in a sustained way. We want to engage with the research community. We want to develop new data sharing capabilities based on what we hear from workshops. And we are just absolutely thrilled to be working with the community and Vivli on this initiative. But wait, there's more. We want to support the longer term provenance, the findability, and the citability of data. So we have partnered with DataCite. We are a consortium member. This affords us some really great opportunities. So we will support all of the NIH institutes. We will offer the ability to have their repositories work with DataCite to provide persistent identifiers for research products. These could be data. They could also be software. They could be reports. We're also supporting essentially a coordination technical and administrative center for our repositories to work with DataCite and the data fabric, so that we can lower the barrier to working with DataCite and create much more of a community that embraces the use of persistent unique identifiers. I really want to encourage the community to really seriously think about using unique identifiers for their data, and then linking those with the ORCID IDs. This benefits everybody. You can see the trail of citation of your data and the impact that it has. We can understand the impact of our data management and sharing policy. So I think this would be something to really consider. There are other things to consider besides best practices for data sharing. Also, best practices for software sharing. We recently published on our web a best practices site. It aligns very closely with the FAIR for Research Software Initiative. At a high level, what we want to do is to provide guidance on the use of software in research and medical and clinical settings. We want to discuss the ways in which software can also have metadata and what might be reasonable metadata for software. This is something the community could certainly discuss. We want to make sure that software is citable and that there is a best practices for developing code. This does align as well with our strategic plan for data science, and it aligns very well with what we see happening in the community for FAIR for research software. I know our time is getting towards the end, so I just want to give you a few sort of FYIs. This is probably the most important slide here. How do you get the resources to understand what NIH is doing for the data management sharing policy? Please visit sharing.nih.gov. You can see the latest updates, all of the opportunities we have in webinars, all of the new notices coming out with new guidance and policies. We link to the BMIC website that tells you which repositories NIH is funding. Actually, it includes even beyond NIH funded repositories, how you can access the data, how you can input the data for sharing, what their guidelines are. It includes all of the generalist repositories as well. It's an amazing site. So this is probably, today my most important slide. And here's my second most important slide. Please join Vivli, NIH, and all of our generalist repositories in the GRAY Collaborative webinar. This is a way for you to learn more about what we're doing in the GRAY, about the resources that are offered by the generalist repositories, and some of the best practices that they can provide for sharing NIH-funded data. The next webinar is going to be next week on the 10th. I hope that you'll join us. We've been having great conversations, and the webinars have been fantastic thus far. And lastly, if you're interested in ways in which NIH institutes are sharing data, each month we host a data sharing and reuse seminar series on the second Friday at noon. We hear from an institute and one of their funded PIs on ways in which they're making data available to their research communities. So you'll just see a few of our speakers. Karen on Databrary, really great way of sharing video interactions of mothers and children. Pruvish Katari, who considers himself a bona fide data parasite, and he's got some really great ways of munging together open access data to advance clinical and translational diseases. And then Alexander Vopolinsky, who is the PI behind the Brain Image Library. And with that, I am just right at time, hopefully. So sharing data is important. It's a catalyst for all of us. Integrating our policies, our resources, and our infrastructure is key to what NIH is doing. I hope I've presented somewhat of a coherent picture of how we are doing it. We want to promote effective data sharing, not as the rule, not as the exception. And with that, I am happy to pass it back to the organizers. I think we perhaps have time for Q&A, or maybe, oh
yes,
no, we have Dave
of course.
Jones. Okay.
No, we do have time for questions. So if you have any other questions for you, Susan, please put them in the Q&A. But thank you so much for your talk. It was very clear and about the policy and what needs to be done, and certainly look forward to having data reused by NIH investigators in the future, and more of this data flowing in January and years to come, of course. We do have a question coming in, is that now that we can share the slides, can others reuse them to help be ambassadors for this new DMS policy at their own institutions?
That's a great question, Lena. So if you don't mind, because I cribbed the first half of my talk from my colleagues from OSP and OER, I'm going to ask them if they don't mind, but my slides you're free to use. So mine start at the data flow. All the infrastructure is me, all the policy is them. So I will, if you don't mind, I will ask them, and I suspect they will say that's fine, but let me just double check on that.
Okay, so we'll circle back. We have another question about the issues of IP protection and data sharing requirements.
We will be, that is a super great question. So I have to get a clarifying now. Are you asking about protections for sensitive data and controlled access data, or are you asking about SBIR IP legal? So I can't tell from your question which way I should go here. If you could just let me know which, I think it might be a small business.
Yeah, so if the person could clarify, you know, I guess they're probably speaking about the data use agreement. It would be my guess.
Yeah, that's what I think too.
Asking about IP for patent protection and future
patent
discovery.
Protection. Yes. Okay, that is a great yes. That's what I thought. So you can stipulate, and this we have been doing this currently in some of our programs. You can stipulate in your data management sharing plan that this data will not be shared initially because of IP considerations, and then I think you have a number of years before you actually have to share that data, and that number of years may be on the order of 20. I have to go back and check for sure, but I know that there is considerations for holding data due to IP and patent, and it is a legal process, and I think it's 20 years.
Oh, great. Okay. Well, thank you so much, Susan, for your talk. Very informative, as always. Okay, terrific. So I think we're going to switch gears a bit and talk about two very different data challenges, both of which we are collaborating